Progressives are now calling out the bogus resignation of Bolivia's left-wing president, Evo Morales, and are correctly labeling it as a military coup. Morales was forced to resign on Sunday under threat from the nation's military, police forces, and right-wing protesters. Now, interesting story coming out about the police. Turns out police are now joining. There are lots of reports of police now joining the protests against the new right-wing government. So that's interesting. So now going back to the protesters here, they were backed by Christian fundamentalists and neoliberals who want to basically roll back the nationalization of the country's natural resources, including oil, and to make sure that the country's lithium deposits are able to be accessed by multinational corporations. Now, Bolivia has the second largest concentration of lithium in the entire world. And lithium, of course, is a main component in battery technology used for electric cars. Now, in order to see the reaction to the news of these lithium deposits now likely going to be privatized, you only need to look at Tesla's stock prices. So now, his supposed resignation and exile, by the way, followed Morales' announcement that he would hold new elections after the U.S.-dominated Organization of American States, the OAS, had said that there was irregularities during the election that happened on October 20th. Now, Morales actually won by about 600,000 votes, which is a 10% margin over his more neoliberal / right-wing opponent. And yet, they said, oh no, we've got irregularities, right? So now what's interesting here is that election experts have disagreed. And besides, when you look at the OAS, they've long had an anti-leftist bias. In fact, they were created to combat communism in South America, which the Morales government wasn't exactly communist. So anyway, now prominent progressives have decided to release some statements on this. We'll start with, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, she stated simply on Twitter, quote, "What's happening right now in Bolivia isn't a democracy, it's a coup." That, of course, pushes back against the current narrative in the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, who have all pointed out all the negative things about Evo Morales and basically called him an authoritarian, a dictator, et cetera, et cetera. So taking that very right-wing narrative on Bolivia. Representative Ilhan Omar, also, she was the first one to speak out on Sunday of the squad. She said there's a word for the president of a country being pushed out by the military. It's called a coup. She said, we must unequivocally oppose political violence in Bolivia. Bolivians deserve free and fair elections. No, of course, there's a lot of people that are pushing back and saying, but they didn't have free and fair elections. No, that's not exactly true. Again, Morales won by about 600,000 votes, 10% over his opponent. And there was, contrary to the charges by mainstream corporate media and the U.S. government, there was no proof of election fraud. In fact, according to the Center for Economic and Policy Research, statistical analysis of election returns and tally sheets from Bolivia's October 20th election showed that there was no evidence of any kind of irregularities or fraud that affected the official results that gave Evo Morales a victory in the first round. So what we have is essentially a U.S.-backed illegal coup, just as we saw with Brazil, and just as we nearly saw with Venezuela. So now, Ilhan, AOC, and now Bernie weighed in. And by the way, Bernie Sanders is the only U.S. presidential candidate to make a statement so far on Bolivia. He said, I'm very concerned about what appears to be a coup, where the military, after weeks of political unrest, intervened to remove President Evo Morales. The U.S. must call for an end to violence and support Bolivia's democratic institutions. So, and right now, having a coup is not exactly a democratic institution. Now, this isn't the first time that Sanders and progressives actually spoke out about things happening in that part of the world. Now, Bernie Sanders, and he deserves a lot of credit for this, and he doesn't get it. I should say he doesn't get that credit, is that he was the only candidate to take the side of political prisoner and ex-leader of Brazil, Lula da Silva. Now, Lula was a very popular politician, just like Evo Morales. Um, he was arrested during another right-wing takeover by U.S.-backed opposition, Jair Bolsonaro. So, like I said, this happened in Brazil. So now Lula, if you guys can remember, he was arrested on phony corruption charges, which again they didn't have any proof of. But you take the most popular person out of the race and put him in prison. So you can't run for election in prison. And then you get the populist right-wing leader. And that's what happened with Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro, of course, has opened up the country to basically exploitation by large multinational corporations. And so now we have a situation where there's exploitation of Brazil. And not only that, but you have the Amazon that is also on fire. Thanks to, of course, Bolsonaro opening that up to logging, mining, etc. And so that's what happens. So, look, AOC, Omar, Sanders, what they've done is that they've showed a surprising level of leadership, at least compared to other politicians. Again, you have a lot of politicians from the right that are deeply supportive of these right-wing leaders and of crushing left-wing governments. Not a surprise, but you don't see a lot on the other side. You don't see a lot of Democrats defending these left-wing leaders. Now, why is that? Well, because a lot of Democrats aren't really left-wing. That's one of the big problems here with the left, or I should say with the Democratic Party, is that they're not with the left. They are not the left. They're the establishment and actually tend to support those right-wing leaders that are trying to usurp democracy in these South American countries. And so now, one thing, and one Democrat that I want to point out, who's good on a lot of issues, and I do like her, but Elizabeth Warren still hasn't made a statement about this. She never made a statement about Lula da Silva. She hasn't made a statement really about, she hasn't made one about Bolivia. And so, look, that's a red flag to me. I think that's something that worries a lot of progressives. And that goes to the belief that Warren isn't actually capable of really standing up for her positions. And again, that's something that progressives that's something that we worry about. We want someone who is willing to stand up and say and do the right thing that we can, count on to fight for us, even when it's not politically popular. And Bernie Sanders is the only politician that's running in the Democratic side that actually has that has been saying the same thing for 40 years, even when it was not popular, pushing for Medicare for all, pushing for gay rights back when it wasn't popular, pushing for, these policies, single payer, free college, etc., a higher minimum wage. Been fighting for these same things. It's been consistent. But also, like I said, I guess when it comes down to it, when you fight for something that isn't popular, that makes you a real leader instead of a follower. And look, for Medicare for all, I've had a lot of Johnny-come-latelys jump on and say that they support Medicare for all, or they support universal health care, or they support Medicare for some but not all, or Medicare for all who want it. It's not real. And so we see these people. We see the people who jumped on to the name because it was popular. And we see the people who were there from the beginning, who have been fighting from the beginning. And we see that they were fighting when it wasn't popular. And the reason that it is popular now is because of them. And so That's what true leadership is. And so it translates into stuff like this as well. Speaking out for Palestinian rights when that's not a popular position these days and hasn't been a popular position. When the mainstream position of for example, the U.S. government is protect Israel at all costs, even if they do human rights abuses. Speaking out against the Israeli abuses of the Palestinians will automatically get you a label of being anti-Semitic, which anti-Semitism does exist, and it exists in large part, especially for the right wing, who tend to scream anti-Semitism, but also the Democrats tend to scream anti-Semitism at anyone who criticizes the beloved Israel. And so that's an issue. But also an issue that you can lead on by saying, hey, you know what? I do respect Palestinian rights. And I do believe that even though, what Hamas does is wrong, and even though I do respect, the fact that Israel is there and that, we care about the safety and security of people in Israel, these people who are in Palestine also have rights and they deserve to be treated like human beings. And I don't think that's a radical thing to say, but then again, there's a lot of people who would disagree with that statement. And so even calling that out and saying it is taking what is considered to be a bold, radical stance. And again, that's what leadership looks like. So now, again, with Omar, AOC, and Sanders, we know, at least from what they've been saying, that they have the political courage to speak up. And that's really important going forward, not just for a Democratic primary, but when you're actually in power and can do something about it. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a patreon.com/TYTNation set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.